This is Chill Bill coming at you live from Cathedral, introducing another segment of the 10th anniversary celebration of Skylanders Portal Casters. Over to you, Inklander.
Thanks, Chill Bill. Joining us for this segment is an incredibly special guest. He has done some amazing work in the video game industry over the past decades, doing some stuff actually starting with Dungeons and Dragons before doing some work with EA with games like Archon and Mail Order Monsters, before founding Toys for Bob, creating the cult classic Star Control series, and moving on to creating Skylanders, what we're here to talk about today for the 10th anniversary. The founder of Toys for Bob, Paul Reiche. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure to be here and talk with you. 10 years is pretty momentous. And I remember the exact day I went and told everybody that we were going to start making toys. And it's hard to believe it was a decade ago.
I guess looking back on it from 10 years, how do you feel about starting the Toys to Life trend? Did you ever expect it to get as big as it did?
We did not expect the Toys to Life market to grow the way it did for a bunch of reasons. We were pretty sure we had an innovative idea, but oftentimes innovative ideas collide with reality and reality wins. But in this case, we had Iwei and Robert, Iwei Huang and Robert Leyland. And so the three of us were able to kind of craft some toys that were prototypes and then actually get it working pretty early on. And then once we put the toy on the portal and the character appeared on screen, something what seemingly as simple as that, we just were excited every time we did it. And we knew, okay, this is really cool. And then all through development, it took us about 2 years to get the game done. We sort of kept looking over our shoulder and thinking one of two things. Either we're dreaming and they're not going to let people who've never made toys make millions of toys, or someone else is going to do this, Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft, and they're going to throw a gazillion dollars at it, and they're going to clobber us. And eventually that kind of did happen, but we had a few years there where we were the only ones producing, Toys to Life games and the line of toys, and it was so fun to walk into whether it was Toys R Us or Walmart or really any store and see things that we had put our heart and souls working in a relatively small office in Northern California, and then just seeing it expressed all over the world on these huge shelves. It was super exciting.
Yeah, although I do have to say, like Lego might have come out with their own thing, Disney. You all did it the best. You really did.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Really did.
I would like to make a quick comment. Toys to Life, you mentioned it was magical to you guys. It's magical to us too. And I can honestly say, from a toy standpoint alone, there is plenty of magic in the Skylanders series. My son and I did not pick up an actual game until Trap Team, but we had been collecting the toys because they're just so cool as toys before that.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. When we first made it, that was a hope we had, was that the toys would have value independent from the game. And then people started sending us photographs. Like one young kid, I think he was like 5, was scared of a lot of things. And so his parents said, well, why don't you put the Skylanders around the house to keep you safe? And so we saw some lined up on the toilet and some lined up on his windowsill and some in the kitchen. And it was just so cool to see that they actually had become something to him, something beyond the plastic and the paint. They were characters that lived with him around the house, and that felt great.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what will happen when you know that the characters actually do come to life in a way, and it just kind of makes them all the more magical.
See, for me, they became more than just the plastic because it offered me a very easy way to bond with my son.
When you make a game, you really hope that what you're going to do, sure you want to make money for the company you work for, but really what you want to do is help other people connect with each other and in a positive way. And doing it with parents and kids is frankly one of the hardest ways to do it. Between peers, it's a little bit easier. But so seeing people talking about, I knew someday my son was going to play Diablo, but we played this first. And, sort of it was like the entree into the world of gaming. And since most parents these days did themselves grow up as gamers and have stayed gamers, it just felt like an honor to be that first game that a lot of new players, new kids got to play with their parents. just last night, I mean, it's been a while since I worked on Skylanders day to day, and I've been moving, doing the classic downsizing. And so one of the things I refuse to get rid of is my boxes and boxes of Skylanders, which are now filling storage space. But last night I was hanging out with Fred Ford, who he and I founded Toys for Bob about 30 years ago. And although we don't work there anymore, we're now working on a new project, a sequel to the Urquan Masters. But I was hanging out with him eating steak, which I love to do. And his daughter, who is at college, was there with two of her college friends. And they came sort of bounding over to say that the night before, his daughter Cassidy had pulled out this enormous boxes of Skylanders, and these college girls played Skylanders for a while, and they just thought it was so cool. And I went over like, which characters were you playing, and which did you like the most? And it was just so fun to see people who hadn't played before, even adults, getting into it.
Yeah, amazing. How did you come up with the concept of Toys to Life? We've heard in previous interviews that there was this email that was going around Activision to try to get people to come up with peripheral ideas. But how did the idea of bringing a toy to life in a video game actually pop in your head? How did that come to be?
Well, it's like a dream, or a childhood memory. You kind of hope that you're remembering the real thing and not just the thing that you've said 1,000 times. But first off, it comes from I, as a little kid, had toy characters who were companions, and I had adventures with them in my pocket, or running around at dirt clod fights or whatever we were doing. And so for me, toys had more to them than the plastic and the paint, and that's not that unusual. But what stuck with me was, even as an adult, I was a nerd, and I kept some of my childhood toys, and I kept collecting toys. So when the cool Japanese robots started coming out, they were very expensive, and only adults got them. So I was getting those and picking up cool Ultraman toys when I was in Japan, or when Fred was visiting over there. He would bring back, cool monster toys from the kaiju movies, which I love. And so I had also then started getting into crafting and having a craft project on the side to sort of keep myself sane. And so I liked rubber monsters in particular. In the 60s, there was a particular short period of time where they made these toys called oily jigglers. But it was a particular set of kind of like, I don't know, Big Daddy Roth almost like characters, very exaggerated. And they were cast in this particular kind of probably polyurethane that was super elastic and just had the most amazing feel in your hand, and when you're biting on it, as I could promise you, I bit some of my toys. And so I wanted to go back and make some of those, because they had stopped making them, I presume, because the plastic and the rubber was incredibly toxic. But so I started molding and then casting rubber molds, and then finding different kinds of plastics and rubbers that I could cast with, and different kinds of colors and glow-in-the-dark materials. So I actually had a bunch of sort of personally cool but professionally lame toys lying around that I had made. And so Robert, at one point, we were having lunch together, and Robert and I have worked on and off since 1980. And he was mentioning RFIDs and the kind of things that they could do technically. And somehow my toy making brain and the RFID thing just sort of stuck in my mind. And then we were there was just this email from Activision, this legal department came out, and it was sent pretty broadly. I mean, it might have gone to all employees. And it was phrased in this hysterical way, which was like, Activision has determined that patents are an excellent value for the company to have. And therefore, should any of you who read this message have ideas you would like us to patent for the company, please send them. And that was sort of the totality of the message. And I laughed, thinking like, this is not going to inspire many people to fire off their ideas, because it just sounded like it was purely for the benefit of the company. And it was very like almost robotically written. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be the guy who responds. And I responded with 3 ideas, 2 of which went into the patent process, and 1 of which was the Toys to Life patent, the very first one of those. And the other one was for a game in which you run around with your phone and an app, and you capture real estate in the real world. And then you can band together with other people and sort of fight for the real estate that exists in the real world. So if you wanted to run in together to downtown Disney, and you and your friends could all press the button at the same time, then your clan would now show on the map that you owned downtown Disney. That's a sector. And so those 2 games back in 2007, I think, were the ones we went through the patent process on. And then they just sort of sat there until this opportunity with Spyro showed up. We had been really working hard to come up with, like, well, how can we reinvigorate Spyro? What can we do? And ultimately, we offered 3 ideas, one of which I remember Iwei's little drawings. He hand drew these little toys, several of which went in almost as is in this design document. There were 2 other ideas that bracketed this little idea, and I never in a million years thought they would choose that one, to be honest, because there were so many risks and it was so expensive. But that was the one that everybody believed in, and thank God they let us do it.
Now, also, when you were offered the opportunity to work with the Spyro franchise, you weren't originally thinking of the toy idea at all. Originally, you were thinking of like some sort of post-apocalyptic future idea, right?
Yeah, boy. See, that's one of those 999 bad ideas that I come up with. But the premise was we were being encouraged to work in 3D in a very graphically intensive way so that things would look beautiful in 3D. And it was sort of independent of the game you're making or the style, genre, gameplay. And so when we started looking at Spyro, we sort of said, this is cool, but this isn't going to hit on that thing that they really wanted us to do, sort of photorealistic 3D work. And I was like, how do you possibly combine the world of Spyro with photorealistic work? And ultimately what we decided is, well, what if the Spyro, like in Toy Story, where you have these tiny toys living in a real world, what if somehow Spyro and his characters came to Earth? We said, okay, well, there's magic over in Spyro's universe. We can get them here. But then the world's really complicated and almost overwhelming if for some reason Spyro's characters come in and they're toy-sized, so they can pretend to be toys when they want to be. But humans are going to be huge and driving cars, and how is little magical characters going to feel powerful? And people already know so much about the real world. How do we make their exploration and adventure feel more fascinating? And then we were tossed this little curveball, which was, please make it appeal to adults, or at least the hardcore market. And sometimes when you hear that kind of thing as a game developer, you just say, no, impossible. Please give me new recommendation. But sometimes you try to be a good soldier and you're like, okay, this has become a game for me now. How do you take Spyro and photorealistic graphics and bring in an older market and combine them into a design? And when you find yourself doing this, this is usually a bad idea. But so what we decided was, and I'm afraid to say this is my idea, but that when Spyro and all of the characters from that universe land in Earth, they arrive in an Earth that has been emptied of humans for several months. And so they're little and they're in a world they don't understand that's overgrown and some of it's broken down. And there's nothing inimical waiting for them. There's just an empty world that's sort of a surreal version of the world that we live in. What happened to the people? No one knows. But then it's about essentially how the different characters from Skylands sort of start taking over aspects of the real world and starting to, the bad evil characters start to get guns and start to sort of become classic villains in a more human sense. And it was just about how these fantasy characters in a real post-apocalyptic world would find themselves. And we got pretty far into the design doc, and then there was just this complete crisis of like, oh my God, one, this is not super compelling to adults because we're still talking about Spyro and his friends. We didn't really want to change them too much. And also, this isn't going to be appealing to Spyro fans because we're not giving them the characters they know doing the things they know. And we call this the Venn diagram problem. So if you remember Venn diagrams from school, you've got sets of things, and you've got their union, which is you get everything in both sets, and you've got your intersection, which is you only get the two parts of the sets that kind of overlap. So classically, someone once said, people love, this is back in the early 90s, late 80s, people love flight simulators, and they love dragons. So let's make a dragon flight simulator. And what they found was that the Venn diagram intersection of those two audiences was null. And it didn't sell at all. And that's what we had done with my modern kind of re-envision of Spyro as being dark and gritty. We were going to appeal to neither group. And so we went to our publisher and just said, yep, we've been working on this for a couple of months and we drew some interesting pictures, but we've lost faith and we need to go a different direction. And thankfully they were willing to give us that latitude.
Although
Now-
it is kind of interesting to hear like the Earth idea that they all kind of came to Earth, because that basically stuck with the Toys to Life concept.
It did. It's funny how bits of ideas percolate in your imagination and they come back. And so I've had characters in the Urquan Masters universe living in my head for 30 years. And there's ideas that I took from that universe and then used, and then they sort of would migrate into a fantasy game, and then they would sort of migrate into something else as I was going through life. And in fact, we sometimes would connect, like there's this thing called Wimbley's Trident in Urquan Masters, which is there's this evil capitalist race called the Druge, and they're trying to sell you junk, useless junk. And one of them is called Wimbley's Trident. And the Druge make it out to be this awesome thing that's quivering with power, and it's totally useless if you buy it. But then in the Horde, we had Wimbley's Trident be the most powerful magical item you could get. And there were these vague connections between the Horde and Star Control. And then before Skylanders happened, Fred and I ran Toys for Bob as a division of Crystal Dynamics. And one of the last things we did there, and this didn't go forward, was we worked on a design called Minions. And it was very much like Skylanders. Chaos was essentially a character in there, although he had a different name at that time. And you had these bands of characters that you collected. We didn't have the toy connection, but there was a whole lot there. And when we left Crystal Dynamics, part of our separation from them was, well, we're going to take this idea with us because we think there's something here. So that ended up being kind of the initial backbone of the story that we built around. And then rapidly it took off on its own. It was unrecognizable. But good ideas that live in your head for a while, that keep wanting to come out, eventually they'll find a venue to do so.
You mentioned the fans with Spyro and his friends not doing what they would expect Spyro to do. That brings up the question of, were there any plans to include more characters from the Spyro franchise?
We sure discussed it. We looked at Hunter. Obviously, we brought in Cinder. By the time we really wanted to introduce a cast of characters of our own, I'll be completely honest. And by the time we got to Giants, and we said, do we want to bring in these other characters? We had also gotten some feedback from some Spyro fans that they weren't 100% delighted in what we had done with Spyro. And we sort of said, well, we could bring in Hunter. The people who don't know Spyro won't know him from anybody. And the people who do know him from Spyro might dislike him. So is the value of bringing Hunter into Skylands, just like odds-wise and resource investment-wise, better than creating some character from scratch who's going to fit in to our scheme for this year as well as we can? And we kept finding ourselves saying, it's way better for us to make an original character. And I think that was the right choice, because when Toys for Bob came back after Fred and I had left and did the Spyro remaster, the passion for the original characters as is pretty powerful. I just wouldn't want to have disaffected those fans anymore.
Well, I don't know. To me, like, even as like a Spyro fan as well as a Skylanders fan, I think some people maybe reacted a little too negatively there. In my
Yes.
opinion. I think that everything that you and Iwe did with Spyro was great. I know there are a lot of older Spyro fans that'll disagree, but I think that it was really good.
One of the craziest things was we brought Moneybags over fairly completely, but they wouldn't let us use the name Moneybags. So we had to change it to I think Auric. And we just like, but he is a character in Spyro. And they're like, well, we just are too worried about the monopoly trademark or something along those lines. Every now and then the lawyers get nervous and prevent you from doing something that seems pretty simple, but you kind of have to listen to them.
That explains the mystery behind Moneybags turning into Auric.
Yes. Yeah, I love the Moneybags character. He was perfect as is. He could have lived in Skylands 100%. We drifted him over to the Mabu design just to sort of help unify that race as the human replacement or the humanoid replacement of Skylands. But yeah, I loved him.
Moneybags easily could have lived in Skylands, and you are correct. Perfect as is.
Which character would you guys have brought over if you could pick one?
Oh, Bianca. Hands down. As a fan, I was disappointed that we didn't get Hunter and Bianca and Sparks as an actual Skylander. Along with several of the others. Like, I would have loved Sheila and Bentley, too.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I understand where you were coming from with your original characters for the franchise, because you got to be able to do your own thing to build your own IP.
I want Sparks as an Air Element Skylander.
That would have been cool.
It would have.
That really would have been cool. Flying in Skylands was always one of the most difficult discussions to have, because we knew how we wanted the characters to fly, but it just wrecked the gameplay every time we headed that direction. And so the fact that they're sort of flying right off the surface of the ground was the best we could do at the time. I'm not sure which way I would go now, because still air is big and empty, and making it interesting to be in is a challenge. So putting some sort of limiting on the flying characters seems necessary, but it would have been nice to give them greater freedom, at least in some points of the game.
Yeah, so we actually have a question on that
Yes,
because
we
in
do.
the earlier games, we had like water Skylanders were able to walk on water. We had the flying Skylanders that could also fly over water. So why was the decision made to drop that in later games?
I didn't like that decision, but there comes a time when a bunch of designers are telling you fervently that it was incredibly difficult to do that. Please don't make them do it again. We were under time pressure in Giants. We spent 2 years on the first game, and then we were told, "Hey, look, we're going to get another team to help. They're going to ping pong with you, so you'll each get 2 years." So the good news was you'll get 2 years to do a sequel. The negative news is, of course, well, I don't know if this is negative, but sort of selfish on our part. We kind of wanted to do everything ourselves, and so we then needed to share our universe with someone else. But they said, but this first year, you need to do another game in exactly 1 year. There were a lot of things that we wanted to do or had done that we had to backpedal on because we just didn't have the time. And then, of course, once you drop something, it's very hard to put it back. So I really loved that. I thought it gave it value, and I really wanted to be in the water more often. That just felt great to me. So that was a pragmatic decision, not a very exciting answer, I'm afraid. But
It really was a cool feature. Your answer kind of leads us into another one of our questions, and that was how hard was it to develop Skylanders Giants knowing you only had about a year of development time?
Well, fortunately, we were using a game development system that Fred had created, and it was all about empowering non-programmers to effectively program and to create all of the interactivity themselves. And so ultimately, even though we didn't have a large programming staff, we had a lot of good designers. And the system really only you really only needed to know high school algebra. If you wanted to get fancy, maybe a little trig. But we had a lot of designers, but we couldn't wait for a large design document to be created. So even as we were finishing Skylanders, Mike Ebert and his level team were working on brand new levels, and Toby and Dan Gerstein and the other character designers were already starting to build up characters. And we had pitched a number of different ideas, what we called weapons masters, which was replaceable weapons, and which actually was technically not capable. We weren't capable of doing that yet. And Giants was just this obvious, like, it's really easy to communicate. We were holding them in our hands because we could print them out. I'm like, it is great to have a giant Skylander. This is awesome. And then we were doing sort of gameplay tests and showing the feats of strength. We needed these unusual moments that were highly cinematic to kind of demonstrate how different quantum of strength these characters have. And so we said, okay, we're settled on giants. We're going to do these giants. We're going to do this going back in time story and having to deal with something from the past. And so we had to then say, that's it. That's what we're doing. And this was very, very early on. And we said, okay, everybody go into production now. And we all sort of ran in parallel because we had a fairly simple plan. And so much of the effort went into the characters and making them feel strong and making them look cool and making them not be incredibly expensive, because we kept having the problem of making these really cool, incredibly expensive to develop toys. And then we would spend as much time figuring out how to make them less expensive, but still cool, as we had made them in the first place. It was a challenge. Mostly it was a challenge of discipline, which was, can we stick to what we said and only do that? Because there were so many good ideas. One of the good ideas I'll reveal now that we never got around to doing was a mutation virus. And the idea was we would program this into a very small number of characters. But if you ever played with another character on the same portal, it would hop over to that character and we would save it into that toy. So there was this beneficial virus that you would get. And when you first got it, there was a collection of different possibilities of a permanent buff for your character. And then once you had it, that was it. But then you could go infect other people. And what we were trying to do was get these sort of kind of mass infection happenings where people would get together and intentionally infect their toys with this. And it just seemed like, one, it was weird and interesting, and like I'd never heard of anything like this before. Besides, I mean, there was obviously like some Game Boy Pokemon, people playing those together, but also just the idea of propagating a power virally that had the literal physical connection of needing to get your two toys together just seemed really cool. And we kept introducing ideas like this, and then my individual heads of levels and characters would just say, we have got 6 months left and we have to finish this and debug it, and it's big, and no, let's save it for the next game. And we kept saving that virus idea for the next game and the next game. But that's the one idea I'm sorry we didn't get done, because I just think it was so cool.
I'm like
That's
mind blown.
That's really cool to hear. That's like a physical version, a more grand physical version of what Pokemon did with their virus.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea.
I just, like I don't know if you guys were old enough for this, but there was a time back when chickenpox, there wasn't a vaccine for it. And so I was young enough to get chickenpox. And it was so contagious that you could just put kids together and the other kids would get it. So there was these intentional chickenpox play dates where parents are just like, I know my kid's going to get it. I'd rather schedule it. So I'm just going to take them to a play date with someone who's got chickenpox and infect my child. And we didn't want anything negative. One of the whole points of the positive mutation was it was always good. And the only way you could get it was from another toy.
Yeah, that's just such a really neat idea. Like, I feel like that
Wow,
could have
yeah.
been one of the whole gimmicks for one of the games.
It could have
Really.
easily.
Yeah.
I agree. I think, we faced towards the end of Skylanders, we really faced questions about, are we going to just stop developing console and PC Skylanders? Are we going to just put out another year, sort of do another Giants where it was relatively low cost, but we would have a strong presence the next year? Or are we going to step back and take 2 or 3 years and reinvent the genre? So we spent about 3 months looking at the reinvent the genre, and we came up with some interesting ideas. But ultimately, the retail places where you could buy toys were so clogged with so many toys from the 3.5 games. There were 3.5 different Toys to Life game companies at that point, that we really couldn't move a new collection of toys that was fundamentally different into that channel. We knew we would have to let a couple of years go by. And Activision ultimately didn't want to wait that long. They wanted to try out the game out in the mobile world. It was a fair test on their part, because what we discovered, we were actually in an interesting spot in Skylanders where we were the first people to get a new band of players. Like, kids would start playing console games, and oftentimes Skylanders was the first or one of the first console games they played. So we were really used to this idea of like, okay, we have a new set of people. They don't have preconceptions about what video games are like yet. So let's always talk with them about what their experience is. And one year they just didn't show up. So we still had kind of the older audience that had aged up a couple of years, but the new audience just didn't show up, and that was trouble. And what we discovered was they had iPads and iPhones, and they were never going to get consoles as children, until they could get them themselves. And we just saw this massive shift from the young audience into mobile. And so that's why we quickly pushed to do the mobile version of Skylanders, which wasn't a success. And then why Activision wanted to do no hardware mobile games. And they did a couple of those.
Yeah, and one of those is still going, Ring of Heroes.
Yeah, I played that a fair bit. That was really interesting to work with those guys, because the development company that was doing that had made that style of game before, and they knew how to do everything. And what they didn't necessarily know was how their take on characters who tended to be more adult, and then they would apply them to our characters, and I would sort of say, no. We can't do that to Stealth Elf. That goes against the grain of what she's about. And so they were, eventually that worked out great. I think some of their art, and Battlecast as well, some of the art that they did I thought was great.
Oh yeah, I really like some of the Battlecast art. I think
Yes.
a lot of it's very nice looking. I wish it was Skystones, but
yeah, those guys, they were really they loved Skylanders, and they played it with their kids. They had the right heart. What they picked was a pretty big challenge, to do a combination physical digital card game in which every card was unique. Someday someone's going to have to write about the technical side of what they did, because they actually went to printers and then created these massive card rendering systems so that the cards would actually have uploaded into the multi-card giant printed page. So you print a big page that has multiple cards on it, and they would be uploading that in real time and just generating this colossal database of these giant images to be printed, and then discard them because every card had to have its unique ID on it. And so that was a ton of work. But then, I love Skystones too, but honestly, it would be tricky to extend that into a full CCG. Also, early on, after the first release of the first Skylanders, I got this request to fly down to Los Angeles and to have a meeting about a collectible card game. Activision was going to be meeting with someone about that. And before that meeting occurred, they wanted to have sort of put together some brains to talk about what's possible. And so when I got down there, it was the inventor of Magic the Gathering and two of the guys who were working on this game at Blizzard that was a digital CCG, which was, of course, Hearthstone, although they didn't have a name for it, or that they didn't tell us. And so what was going on, though, was both the guy who invented Magic and the people from Blizzard really wanted to know what the other was doing, because the guy who'd worked on Magic was also doing a digital CCG. And what we didn't know this. And so we were like throwing out ideas and like, why aren't these guys more excited? Why aren't they throwing out more ideas? And eventually we found out what was really going on. But ultimately the decision at that point was, let's hold off on licensing a CCG and see if we want to make it ourselves. Because there were a lot of Magic players and, a lot of other CCG players at Activision at that time.
Although I do think that if instead of doing Battlecast, it had been Skystones, I do think it probably would have sold better.
Could be. I don't know about you, but I have got a lot of those Skystone cards that we sold in cereal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I
That was-
unfortunately never had the pleasure of trying to collect those.
Oh, you know what? That was one of those cases, both in the Monopoly game and particularly the cereal game. We got to design those and do all the creative work. The budgets on those were incredibly small compared to toys. But, like for the Monopoly pieces, we said, hey, we know how to do this. Can we craft our own pieces? And they were like, we've never really done that before. And then they said, our technology is sort of 19th century, so you can't do undercuts like this. And there was a ton of limitations imposed on our pieces. But that was a lot of fun. And then for Battlecast, we had this character named Rich at our office who primarily was doing game balance, but he was a great designer. And Skystones was his and this other guy's invention at Toys for Bob. And so they put together a physical prototype. And the serial game, which I thought was a really good rendition of it, is an absolutely legit game from Toys for Bob, distributed via serial.
That's pretty cool.
Wow.
So I guess Giants is one of my favorite games, I have to say. Whenever I'm doing a live stream of it over on Twitch, I always describe it as Toys for Bob's Majora's Mask.
Oh, thank you. Wow, that's quite an honor.
Yeah, I'm always like, well, Majora's Mask had that same kind of thing where they were asked to take the same assets and do it in a shorter amount of time, and they just blew it out of the water. And I feel the same thing happened with Skylanders Giants.
Yeah, my son and his wife were debating in the back of the car the other day what their favorite Zelda game was. And I believe that's the one that his wife, Mary, was saying she thought was best. And he was going for Wind Waker.
Oh, yeah.
And
Wind Waker's great.
their debates, it's just so funny to hear a married couple, particularly one of whom I know very well, debating as adults the virtues of various Zelda games. It's just, and I didn't have to get involved. I just got to enjoy it from afar.
Now, as somebody who didn't start with the games until Trap Team, there's something that I've always wondered, and that is, why did you wait to introduce the light and the dark elements, and then when they did get introduced, why were they always sidelined and their actual elements a lot more scarce?
So I think that was because there was a pretty big debate at Activision about should we introduce new elements at all. And I was a big fan of light and dark, and I wanted to add new elements, but it was an uphill battle because they were concerned that we already had so many mandatory things that you had to make in each subsequent game that we were effectively saying that the starting point for each successive title was more and more expensive and took more and more time. And therefore, doing the reverse support for all of the toys and then making sure, okay, well, next year, you need to have all of these elements, and you need to have light and dark, and you need to have the kind of new innovation of the year. They were just debating it a lot. And I just thought they're beautiful, by the way. I love the dragons, and I love the characters a lot. But I feel like there was just, remember from Amadeus, the movie about Mozart, where the king just says, too many notes. That was sort of the message we were getting from Activision, which was there's just kind of too many notes here. And so we need to kind of backpedal on anything which has mandatory support that future games will have to do. And early on, actually, we haven't even finished the first game, and this great game designer at Activision in Santa Monica sent us this really scary essay, white paper, and it was the trouble that you're going to have in years 3 and 4. And so he was looking way far out. The rest of us were all focused like the next day. And he's just like the reverse, supporting all the toys is going to chew up a lot of your effort each successive year. You have to basically age out toys. And of course, the advisors that we had from the physical toy world are like, yeah, just like after the first year, they shouldn't work at all. And then people have to buy a whole new set. We're just like, nope, no, we're not doing that. We're going to support all these toys forever. And so that's ultimately, I think, why that was the case, which was people were really wanting to focus their resources on the new innovation. And they felt like by introducing 2 new elements, we had potentially opened a Pandora's box that they wanted to close as rapidly as possible.
I will say that I adore the light and dark dragons. They are just such amazing characters, though.
That's cool. I've got the toys. I've had them in my bedroom now forever, which is sort of embarrassing, but they keep me company. And when I turn off the light, all the glowing ones glow for a while. It's really great. But when I have people who aren't familiar with the games, that's one of the toys that their eyes go to directly. They just are very charismatic, and they stand out just graphically because they are so predominantly one color that when you have this riot of color of a toy collection right in front of you, people really gravitate to those.
Yeah, I really like the base design for the light element.
Yes.
Like
Hmm.
the sunburst pattern with the white and gold is beautiful.
Thank you. I'm gonna, I think, credit Iwe or Alessandro for that one. But we would put such effort into those details and not know, is anyone out there going to notice? And so it's really nice to hear that you did.
Oh, yeah, we noticed.
One other question that we kind of have related to the toys themselves is after Giants, it kind of seemed like Toys for Bob had this go big or go home mentality when it came to producing the rest of the figures, like the Trap Masters and the Senseis.
Yes.
The toys just kind of seemed like they just stayed bigger on the Toys for Bob side. Could you kind of explain why you decided to do that?
I think we were looking to make sure that the new toys had impact both in the game, but then also literally in the package. We had this additional sort of shelf appeal question. And I mean, anytime you're given the choice between do you want a little toy or a big toys are great. They did chew up a lot of space in all of our collections and on our desks. But I think in part it was because we were worried about fans, saying like, oh, this new thing is little. That's not very cool. I like the big toys. And also because as we started to put more electronics inside them, it got kind of hard to shrink it too much. So as we were, starting to put with a light core, we did some light core that were normal size. So that's not probably a good excuse. Certainly with Swap Force, those guys needed to be bigger just so that the connections were manageable. And then, I don't know. I think when we were doing the Trap Masters, we were sitting around and I was really into this idea of having a gem basis for their weaponry. And you needed a certain amount of mass for that to look good, I thought. So it was in part so that they would look cool in the package, big enough to see, and they would stand out. They did get progressively more expensive to manufacture, and our margins got squeezed. And by that, I mean, early on, like Dino Rang had, I don't know, 34 paint ops or something like that. And traditional toys would have had maybe 8. So we were spending a lot of money on our toys, way more than anybody in the industry thought we should. So we were being successively, as each game went along, pushed back in how much we could spend on the toys. We were struggling to achieve as much as we could with this smaller budget. And although mass mattered, it didn't matter as much as paint. So we tried to do some things with detail, and having a larger toy meant we could do more interesting detail rather than do it all with paint ops. I wish there was a class on what we learned about making toys, because it was so fast and it was so interesting and it was such a combination of high tech and low tech. and different countries and different cultures. It was a fascinating experience. One of the things that Activision was trying to do, of course, get us to lower the number of paint ops on things, and paint ops become like, I don't know, like dessert. That word just starts to have a meaning because you know that every single little paint operation you do is going to make your toy cooler. And there was this one time they said, can you not paint the corks in the top of the bottle? And we said, no, we have to paint the corks. And they said, but no one cares. They'll see it's a cork. You don't need to paint it. And it's costing 2 cents or something like that. So, nope, have to do it. So what they did then was they said, well, would you guys like to go see the factories? And at the factories, we had to watch people painting the corks by hand. And, this was hundreds of thousands of them. And so they were just sort of trying to say, understand that this paint operation has to be done by hand. It can't be done with a machine. And there are dozens of people doing this all day long for weeks at a time just to get you your corks. That didn't really sink in because we still did really want to have a lot of cool paint ops. But I always do appreciate those people who sat there very carefully painting the corks.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. Is I think a lot of people don't realize that these weren't painted by machine. These were done by hand.
Mostly, yes. I would say 85-90% was hand painted. The different kind of machines they use, it feels like you're walking into the mid 20th century because the machines just look like something from a Mr. Rogers video. This is how they make Play-Doh or whatever. And they are primitive and yet incredibly efficient. Evolution applies in business, and particularly when you're trying to squeeze every quarter penny out of something because you're making so many of them that quarter penny is going to turn into $250,000 down the line. So they had machines called tampo machines, and tampo machines would be handcrafted with a little tiny stamp. And you could only use these in certain places. And the way that they would be done is you pretty much have this machine going up and down with an elastic stamp on the end. And then people are grabbing a toy from a tray, carefully positioning it. The thing comes down just as they're done positioning it, stamps it. They wait until it's up. They set it in a drying tray for just a second. They're grabbing the next one. And it's just like this amazing dance, or you could say kind of just like regimented collection of people doing these actions over and over. But the net result was it took talent and focus and work to make those things beautiful. And it was humans behind them who did them. So I really honor the people who put all that manual work into making the toys cool.
Like I can't even fathom how long it would take to just make one.
Well, you can try. I recommend that if you have any interest, try to make a toy yourself. There are places where you can, you can find, like at Tap Plastic, you can certainly find some of the material you need, or you can go online and look at various places that'll teach you about molding and casting your first toy and the materials you can cast it in. I find it really fun. And if your kids or if you have a particular character you've always wanted to have a toy of, you can actually go like hunt down a version of the toy and then make a mold with that particular toy and then recast it in different materials. You can cast a toy in metal, or you can cast it in elastic, rubbery plastic. And, you have to be careful not to inhale any of the gases. You need to work in a well-ventilated space, and you need to keep it off your skin. But it is really, if you love toys the way I do, and it sounds like you do, it's fun. It's a fun experiment. And, who knows, maybe one of these days, right now they have yoga vacations you can go on. Hopefully someday you'll be able to go to Santorini Island and make rubber toys.
Sounds cool to me.
It does. Now, do you wish you could have given the Gimmicklanders more value in future games as the series progressed? Like, for example, more giant boulders or traptanium shards, etc.?
I think, of course, I would like to have done that. I really believed that people attached to these characters, I didn't want our characters to be disposable. I wanted you to have ongoing adventures with them. It just was really, really hard to do that because you both wanted to have the core gameplay that was really fun, even if people were just playing through straight with no additional purchases. You had to make sure that the game was good for those folks. Then you had to reward the people for investing in this year's new toys. And then you had to go back and say, okay, now I want to make sure that, people have a place to use their giants and they have a place to use for these characters. And that was really hard. One, to find spots because, we just had more and more stuff to cram in there. and we weren't increasing the size of the worlds dramatically. And then also just the pragmatics of development started clobbering us. We were also switching engines. So as we would do a game, we were using Fred's engine, and the Vicarious Visions would be using their engine. And so each year, the next team would have to not only create their own game, but they would have to go back and reprogram all of the characters from the previous game that was in a different engine. We finally ended up choosing to unify on their engine so that we didn't have to do that. But what it just meant was there was very little resources left for us to just say we want to give Giants like the special experience, even though they were like 2 games ago. So that was hard because it sort of went against our grain of making sure that we always honored your collection. That was sort of one of the mantras: honor the collection. And I would have loved that. And I think one of the things we talked about doing at the very end, which was more along the lines of doing an relatively inexpensive innovation, was pretty much focus on, it was like a potpourri of like all your favorite characters. This is for them. And we would reintroduce characters that had been out of print for a while with some new paint and some new in-game innovation. But it was all about going back and having specific sort of like lands for each of the Inklander. And I think that would have been cool. And we could have, I think all of the things I said about the retail markets being kind of saturated, and I think we still wouldn't have succeeded the way we would have needed to. But I think that would have been an interesting thing to do, is to sort of give a space for each of those characters to kind of shine.
For a while now, looking at like what would happen if Skylanders continued, if it was in existence today, some sort of like open world Skyrim, Breath of the Wild, World of Warcraft kind of thing, but with Skylanders, and you'd have all those objects you'd be able to interact with out in the world, would be so cool.
Yeah, if you could do a Breath of the Wild experience or a World of Warcraft, that would be great. And World of Warcraft has awesome characters, so I think that's a neat idea. Propose that. We're unfortunately busy. Fred and I have a company now, 4 people. Actually, Dan Gerstein was one of the central designers. He designed all of the core combat and almost any interactive systems. And so he's working with us on the new version of the Urquan Masters, the sequel we're making. And Ken Ford, Fred's brother, who had worked with us for years and years and years and years in the past, and recently came back to Toys for Bob and then hopped over to our new company, which is called Frenzy Games. And so we're recreating this very retro garage feel where it's just 4 of us working on it right now. We don't have any management. We don't have any budget to speak of, but we're really enjoying no longer being studio heads that fly around the world, but rather like people sitting at the computer doing the work. And Fred in particular has been working for the long hours for the past year, inventing his next generation of development system, which is coming along. And that's what we're building the new game on.
Wow, very cool.
Right.
I can't wait to see it.
Well, we're being very open about this. We're doing an experiment with so on Reddit, there's in Reddit/r/UQM2, every week we're asking 3 very overt questions about the game design. Sometimes it's like, well, what part of this about the previous game did you like? But oftentimes it's like, okay, our save games were pretty retro when we did them in 1992. What should we do now? Things, the Grim Reaper's had his corners rounded right off of him because, dying in games is pretty unusual. So how should we approach it? But we're also being pretty open with what the decisions we're making and what the game is going to be like. So for those folks who are interested in game development, it'd be great to participate in that because we need all of the great ideas we can get. And I want people to be more involved in helping define the future of games. We're going to be in the indie category with this. I think it's going to be a relatively, a tiny budget compared to Skylanders, but it means a lot to us, and it means a lot to the fans who've been waiting 30 years for the sequel. And so I hope that the same approach that we're taking of reaching out to the fans, actively engaging with them, and in some cases actually getting them to help on the product itself, I hope that can happen. I mean, we got thousands and thousands of Skylander designs, and we were actually not allowed to use any of them. Activision, it's a big corporation, and they were worried about the legalities of that. But man, we got some beautiful drawings and some just great ideas. And, I still got boxes of those letters that I really cherish.
Wow.
One of them might be mine, who knows?
Oh, that'd be great.
I know I sent fan mail to Toys for Bob at one point.
Did you have any ideas? I probably still got your letter.
I know I sent a picture of like my whole Skylanders collection. I know I did that, but oh my gosh, this is like 7 years ago now. It's been a while, but yeah. So you mentioned Reddit. I'm kind of curious. Have you like when Skylanders was in production? Did you pay attention to the online discussion about it at all? Like fan reactions? Did you pay attention to the memes or to Reddit or anything when it was being produced?
A lot of my designers and artists did. I intentionally did not. I didn't want that in my head because we would love to have fans. Like sometimes fans would just show up at the office and we would always give them tours. And I love talking with the people who actually played the game. But the adults who played it, and I love them too, but the ones who wanted to really get deep into criticism of characters, I both didn't want to focus on those folks because they weren't really representative of who our main customer was. I would way rather go talk with kids about it. And also, frankly, sometimes those they can get a little toxic. And maybe I'm just a wuss, and that was just me. But I did have my staff, and they read it very carefully, and they would sometimes, forward things through email, and we would, talk them out. Certainly a lot of the questions you're asking, a lot of people asked us, like, why can't our characters swim anymore? And I remember the debate, the great jump debate. We were dead set against adding jump to the game. And I think there was pros and cons, and eventually it was out of our hands. But I remember reading about that debate, and that was one of the things that someone pointed out in the Reddit thread. And it was a pretty intense back and forth over just jumping. And so I am not a super social media kind of guy. I mean, I love technology and I've read science fiction my whole life, but the act of communicating with bazillions of strangers just makes me want to curl up into a little ball. So that could also explain why I didn't go and look at the Reddit thread too much. Toby, I know, did. So Toby was the lead designer. Mike Ebert was the lead level designer. And I know he was very involved in online commenting, and Ray West as well. Ray was one of the level designers and did a lot of really interesting creative things. And he would often, eventually, we figured out the name he was posting under. And we finally had to say, yeah, probably don't want to get into these conversations quite as hot and heavy as you are. So either he changed his name or he listened to us and didn't. But so I know there were some people who really took it to heart what they were reading.
Yeah, no, and I understand why you didn't want to include jumping because it's an accessibility thing.
It really is. My boss at the time was talking about Swap Force, and he had Swap Force. He had given his kids were some of the Activision kids who got to play the games before they came out, and then got like just a ton of toys for Christmas each year or Hanukkah. And so when Swap Force came out, undeniably cool, people really liked it. And he did what he always did, which is he just brought it in, plugged it in on Christmas morning and gave it to his kids. And he said the first game in with Giants, that was the last he saw of them for hours. And then, nope, they came back and said, Dad, you got to get us through a part we can't get through because it's got a jumping puzzle. So he was like, ugh. So he put Giants back on, and then that was that. But I think we so much wanted the game to be not easy, but free, that you weren't impeded that much. And we actually ended up pulling some stuff out of the game that was way more like stop you in your tracks. And it just wasn't fun. You didn't feel like a hero. So for us, we fought against it for a long time. And also there was just some camera control issues and a number of other things we had to start thinking about. But once it went in, oh my God, every time we would talk to the fans about taking it out, for the most part, they were dead set against us taking it out.
Yeah, like I don't know, like to me, the first two Skylanders games I really like because they're basically dungeon crawlers. You mentioned Diablo earlier; they're Diablo light, really.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, they're really good. They are really solid dungeon crawlers. I think some of the best ever made. Really.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
And I can agree with that, but on the other side of the fence, what made me fall in love with the Skylanders games, having started in Trap Team, was to me it felt very much like Gauntlet meets Spyro the Dragon. Whereas if I had started in Spyro's Adventure or Giants, where it was just purely dungeon crawler, I wouldn't have fallen in love with it the way that I did.
And therein lies the difficulty in sort of you can't please everybody,
Yes.
and it's often those are the hardest decisions to deal with. We had one of our designers had come from Insomniac Studios, and so he had worked on Ratchet and Clank series, and so he very much wanted, if we were going to add jump, wanted us to pay attention to what they had done, because they were cautious about how they would use jump puzzles as compared to other games where it was just like, oh, okay, it's all jump puzzles all the time, and that wasn't too much fun.
I guess, talking about like adding things to the games, talking about removing things in the games. Why did you decide to remove the PvP when you hit Skylanders Trap Team?
That wasn't easy because I love it. I mean, that's if you look at the games I've worked on, they almost all have PvP at their heart. But what happened is we instrumented the game. Activision wanted us to start tracking anonymously people's behaviors so that we could see how much they were using it. And the first evidence we got was this very strong signal of like less than 10% of the people were using PvP. And we had the same reverse, backwards compatibility issues because the characters were balanced quite differently in PvP than they were in the normal game. And the amount of work to get that all working right and to get all of the powers interacting correctly was pretty colossal. And so, it was just looking at like how many people are playing PvP. Yes, they're dedicated, and I felt awful taking it out, but I just kind of couldn't justify keeping in PvP and taking out something else that I thought was going to have a greater impact on a greater number of people. But I just love clobbering people. The other day, I had to quickly get ahead of this message. We were talking about Super Melee in Urquan Masters, and Dan said, "Well, do you just want to kill me in this game?" And I said, "Dan, I want to kill everybody." And I was talking about Super Melee because I love playing that still. And some of my most fun game experiences were playing against like Greg Johnson or some other people at the old offices. But then he was going to quote me broadly without context, so I had to get ahead of that and say, "Yes, I did say this, and here's why." And I would do it again.
Whenever, like, because now everyone that's talking about Skylanders is like the hardcore,
Yeah,
dedicated fan base that's still kind of around. And now it feels like everyone's missing PvP. Everyone's
Yes.
like, if only they'd included it in Imaginators, and like, the whole backwards compatibility would be there.
I
It's quite
agree.
interesting to hear that people weren't using it.
It is.
Well,
And I can honestly say that we loved the PvP so much that we dedicated an entire segment of our podcast to theoretical PvP in Skylands in sort of a D&D fashion.
I wonder if someone couldn't release a Skylanders game. I mean, you'd have to get their permission, but that focused just on that.
Let's see.
There's a question that has been I would almost say bugging me since the TV series for Skylanders came out, but it's never actually confirmed in the games. Who is Chaos's dad?
Chaos's dad. Oh man, I wish I could tell you because I know that the story got into that. Chaos's mom to me, Chaos in my head was always basically a kid in a dangerously powerful evil body. And so his mom would therefore represent the ultimate power of the universe to him. And then having Glumshanks sort of have this like distant affection with mom turned the tables on Chaos's, sort of relationship with Glumshanks. The dad, I'm not sure. And here's where I start my ideas that I've never talked about, may start getting confused with reality. But in the initial version in Minions, and this is not the Chaos character from the game, mom and dad, that the main character in the game was from the evil family that is overthrown by the good characters at the beginning. And the main character, although he's grown up in sort of an Addams family like evil household, is himself not motivated by that, but he's always having to deal with the legacy of it. And his mom and dad are, heads chopped off by a paladin. And so he sticks them in zombie juice, and they're these characters he carries around for the rest of the game. And they talk to him, and they are insightful and evil, and his parents. And so the idea of mom and dad hanging around, even when you're an adult, even when you're a powerful evil character, just struck me as funny. And so having Chaos's mom pop up at the end was something that's about the point where I really stepped back from the narrative and let the team do it, because I'd sort of felt like I'd put in all the ideas I had at the time, and I just wanted to take it from there. And we also started getting a little disjointed as we would switch between Vivi and Toys for Bob, we had sort of our narrative line that we were interested in. They had their narrative line that they were interested in, and they didn't exactly dovetail quite right. So I think you're going to have to ask Alex.
On the subject of the focus on two different narratives, the fans have kind of developed a theory that between the Toys for Bob narratives and the Vicarious Visions narratives, there's kind of two alternate universe timelines going on.
Yeah.
Is that fairly accurate?
Yes. And I would say it is not through any planning, but simply each year. So I can't speak for the Vicarious Visions team, and we like their studio a lot, and we're really excited for Jen O'Neill, who recently went from being the head of Vicarious Visions to being one of the heads of Blizzard. But they had a way that they wanted to tell stories, and they didn't want to be limited to the storylines we were setting up. We had a very different collection of stories that we wanted to tell, and we didn't want to screw up the universe. But we sort of intentionally didn't want to do anything that would wreck the universe. We could threaten it from time to time, but we wanted Skylands to be a place of infinite adventure and endless opportunities to go exploring. And so we wanted it to be a bit more positive. And they very much wanted to have the big drama, and they put a lot of effort into their storytelling. I mean, their animations they spent a lot more of their budget on that aspect of it. There's something about our humor which is absurdist, and I don't know if this is getting too technical or weird, but absurdity and humor is really hard to pull off. Alex was great at it, I think. I was thinking about the hermit who hates clouds. That was just such a strange character, and it's hard to pull those off, and Alex was good at it, and the team had a lot of faith in what Alex wrote and could pull it off. But I think that was just not the kind of humor that VV wanted to do. And so they went off in different directions with story and with tone. And each of us believed in what we were doing. So it was our turn, we would do it. And there was no overarching structure making decisions about Skylanders. We were it. Our studio was it on our year. Their studio is it on their year. And so it evolved oddly for that reason.
Awesome. Yeah, that's some good background on it. And yeah, I do like Ermit. He's quite a fun character. I thought he was quite hilarious.
Yeah, the thing that I liked about him was he was so flawed and yet so fun. He was definitely memorable for me.
I loved a lot of the NPCs, and you get a large variety of humor throughout them. You go from like the absurd, which is Ermit, to the unreliable narrator, which is Flynn, and he was one of the greatest characters ever created. And then you've got
Yes.
Chaos's own brand of humor.
Yeah, and Chaos has so much depth. We just did 2 episodes on Chaos and did a really big deep dive into, how really he's just, he's looking for that love and compassion that he kind of doesn't get from his parents. So we kind of did a
Yep.
whole psychoanalysis of Chaos there, and how he wants to be loved, and the way he's seeking it out is maybe not always through the best means.
That is exactly correct. And he's trying to prove his worth to his
Yes.
parents. That notion is his genesis is in the earlier game Minions, and that is exactly the character he was.
So that's so cool to know, because I haven't heard you talk about any of that in any interviews before. So it's great to know that there was a game that was basically Skylanders before Skylanders. It just took a while to get to the right team at the right time.
There's a long funny story about when we pitched that to Crystal Dynamics, and it didn't go well. They were expecting, I went into a pitch meeting in London because Crystal Dynamics had been purchased by the company that made Tomb Raider. And so we had new bosses, and I was jet lagged, and we had written a very colorful, beautiful design document about Minions and the backstory and how it worked. And as I came in there and sort of started handing these out, they said, "Well, that's great. We're so excited about the sequel to the Horde you're proposing." And it's just like, oh boy, this is not the sequel to the Horde. And I tried to do my best, and then eventually got this strange collection of statements about, "Well, this isn't in the box." And I said, "Oh, well, what's the box?" And they're like, "The box that the successful ideas fit into." And I'm like, "Oh, no, I don't know about that box. The more you tell me about the box, the better it is that I'll know how to make designs that fit in the box." And it was just this long-winded, ridiculous conversation about the box. And I remember stumbling back to my hotel, and before taking a weirdly timed nap because of jet lag, calling up the team and saying, "Guys, we need a plan B." So that was why Minions didn't go forward with Crystal Dynamics.
Stuff that I've not heard before.
Well, a lot of these stories didn't make sense to tell as an employee of Activision because typically what we're trying to do there is represent Activision. And so, you had the things you were focused on communicating. And since I'm no longer an employee of Activision, I still have a lot of affection for them and the people who work there. I can be a little bit looser in what I talk about.
See, and that's one of the things that we're able to take advantage of in this 10th anniversary podcast episode, is that a lot of you no longer work for Activision or Toys for Bob anymore, so we can ask the questions that you weren't necessarily able to answer prior.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many questions I know, like some of these, like, the PvP question and the Inklander question. Like, I know there's a lot that fans have wanted answered for a long time, so we're finally getting to ask some of those. So you said that you don't really pay attention that much to fan reactions to Skylanders Online. So do you know what the general reaction to Skylanders Imaginators is?
I do not.
Okay. Generally, it is perceived. Ditto disagrees. Ditto thinks it's the best.
Yeah,
but,
Imaginators is the best game in the franchise, hands down. No questions asked. I am one of the few that believes that, but I stick strong to that because it is the best.
Okay.
Generally, in the fan base, Imaginators was perceived as the worst Toys for Bob produced Skylanders game.
Okay.
So, what, I guess, is your reaction to that? And looking back on it, do you think that there's anything that you want to change about the development of the game?
One of the things that we were trying to do was we knew that there was a chance that this was the last Skylanders game. So we had pretty much been told, if you don't make more money with this game, then this is the last one. So we intentionally wanted to leave a game with the audience that they could create their own characters. I think one of the things that we got into was it was mandated that we add digital purchases in game, which was not a very comfortable thing to do. That necessitated a whole gacha design system in the different items that you could get to make your characters cooler. And I think that felt weird to us. If I could pull one thing out, it would have been the digital purchases. And then also, I think there's a general feeling that the adventure game wasn't as innovative as people wanted. There were a lot of ideas that we didn't put in there because of time constraints. I think that was hard for the level designers in particular. The character people got all the resources in Imaginators just because there was so much more to do there. And so I think the level people felt like they didn't get to tell the story of a scope that they wanted, and that the play experience wasn't as large as they wanted. So I think if I could have dialed the resources back to level development more, and I put a lot of time and effort, and so did Iwe, into the 3D printable characters because I misjudged how rapidly that technology was going to emerge. I was using like Moore's law, and it totally, like, 3D color printing is still pretty much where it was 6 years ago. And so I was really hoping that we could get to the point where we could turn around a Skylander toy as close to real time as possible. And so we were talking with all kinds of people who are doing future development on 3D printed toys. And we were looking at development systems that could print electronics straight into the toys. And I also really wanted to allow you to start getting personalized representations of your creativity. So I think that was a fine idea. It just didn't intersect with what people were interested in buying. It was too expensive, and it drained, I think, a lot of our focus. So I'm being super critical here. And I love all our games. I'm proud of all of them. But if I could change the decisions that I made, it would all be about priorities. And I would have de-emphasized the priority on the 3D printing, the t-shirts, and the playable cards, and pour more back into level design and the narrative of that. What do you guys think?
Generally, in terms of what the fans think, the level design thing pretty much hit the nail on the head there. I've never heard a complaint about the character creator other than like, oh, I wish there were options for four-legged characters.
Yeah,
I've never heard any other
that's true.
complaint. No other complaint. They're like, this is the best character creator basically ever. Which is true. Like, when you can get to the point where you're able to start like changing the color of the eyes and the tail width of a character, like, But what more do you want out of a character creator? Nothing.
You know
But
what? One of my favorite things was one of the easiest, and it was the tagline creator, where you sort of create the thing they say.
Their
Uh,
catchphrase.
yeah,
yes,
catchphrase. Yeah, yeah, that was hysterical. When I saw that demoed for the first time, I was laughing so hard.
it's a really refined creator. Like most everyone loves it. But yeah, I think the place where everyone says the game falls off is like like you get all the collectibles for the characters, but where are all the other collectibles? It's missing things like story scrolls and stuff like that. Everyone's like, "Oh,
It
where?"
really is.
And the level design felt like it kind of took a lot of ideas from the previous games and just kind of, I guess, didn't even really reinvent them. It just kind of reused them. So a lot
Yeah,
of people are feeling like the level design and the story could have been a little bit bigger, but everyone loves
I
their character.
agree.
But yeah, and I also have a lot of the custom printed cards. I do have a lot
Oh,
of them.
you do? I was really impressed with those. I had a T-shirt that I wore until it faded out, but I've been able to, because I am downsizing, moving from a 5-bedroom house to a very small condo. I've been going through every bit of accumulated material I have from high school till now, and so I've been finding a lot of the cards I had printed. And, you know, I loved the magic of using physical mail. I think getting a letter has become kind of a weird magical thing now for a kid. That just doesn't happen really. And there's some treasure box things that you can purchase for Disney or for other for comics, Marvel. But we were trying to design a system that would use physical mail as part of the magic of Skylands. And I think that we just tried to do too many things at once, which is a problem I have. But I'm really proud of the character creator. I mean, you can see we poured a ton of effort into that. I
Oh
just
yeah,
wished we had poured a similar amount into level design. One of the smartest decisions we made was not to include gender in it at all. Um,
yes.
and, Toys for Bob, one of the things I'm most proud of was big in getting support for LGBTQ, both for insurance purposes and just sort of acceptance within Activision, and creating programs that having really robust pride celebrations. And some of our folks from Toys for Bob started going around to other studios and conducting inclusivity training. And so it was very important for us that the character creator allowed people to make the character that they wanted. And it didn't take long to realize that it's just way better to let people build what they want and then let them describe what this character is like. They might even be interested in this conversation, but I wanted people to be able to build exactly the character that they wanted. Once we started adding any categorizations, even the kind of fighting style, we had to do that for important reasons. But as much as we could let people build the character of their dreams and then live with it, I just wish we could have delivered high quality toys at a reasonable price, because that would have been a dream come true for people to make their own toys.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's just yeah, like the character creator. Like so many companies now, I think, still struggle where it's like you pull up a character creator and the first thing's like, all right, male or female. That's the first thing that it asks you. Not the case in the Skylanders character creator. You can
No.
just you can have them wearing whatever outfit you want. The voice clips are not tied to gender at all. It's perfect. Like that is a character creator that still stands the test of time in
Oh,
2021.
thank you.
Now, you asked us, what our thoughts on what we would do to make Imaginators better. And as
Yeah.
one who says that Imaginators is the best game, hands down, I actually have two thoughts. We've already touched on one of them. The game would have been made so much better if it had PvP.
Okay.
The only other change I would make, honestly, involves the character creator. And it was my only real complaint about the game. And that was when you go to create your character, why was the decision made to make the choice of battle class a permanent decision and lock that in place?
I think part of it was money, to be completely honest. We really wanted people to explore the different battle classes, but if they only had one crystal, then they could explore all the different classes with one crystal. And I hate to sound like a that we were looking at money as one of the predominant decisions, but it actually did matter, because for this to make sense to Activision, they needed people to purchase more than one crystal. And also, we I also felt, and again, I'll take full credit for this thing that you hate. I wanted people to realize there was a momentous decision to be made, and that this was important, that you were really creating a character as compared to like twiddling bits. My concern was that if people could flip their character around in any way they wanted, they would potentially lack a character because they would just become like a Swiss Army knife of characteristics. I don't know if we achieved that. I don't know if making that decision somewhat permanently mattered. One thing I will say is initially that decision survived reset. So not only when you made the decision was it about the character, but I believe it survived. You couldn't even reset it out of it. Now, I'm
No.
praying I'm right about this. Can you reset the character and then the crystal can be redefined with a character of a different battle class? Or is the battle class so permanent that it penetrates reset?
The battle class is so permanent that we had to find a workaround in order to reset it, using
Yeah.
a Nintendo DS version of Spyro's Adventure.
Yes.
Oh dear. I am so sorry about that.
Well, I see where you're coming from with the whole not wanting it to be Swiss Army knife, and that's actually really good, solid reasoning that I had never thought of. There was also the fact of young kids don't tend to think of this as a big, momentous decision. Like, my son would randomly, arbitrarily throw a crystal into the portal, and if it didn't already have a character on it, he would just pick something. I had just created an undead knight, and then the next morning, while I was, prepping breakfast, my son was playing Skylanders, and he also went and made another new crystal into an undead knight.
Oh,
And it's
Yeah.
just that the younger children, he was only, I want to say, 6 years old at the time. The younger children really don't think about that and don't realize that when it says it's a final decision, they don't realize the permanence of what that means.
yeah.
So that was the
I-
flip side to it, but I do appreciate the idea of not wanting these characters to be a Swiss Army knife, because yes, that makes the character creation matter so much more.
Yeah.
I think we should have, in retrospect, I think we should have allowed full reset of the toy back to completely empty.
And that's the one thing I would do to change. That's the one big change I would make to Imaginators to improve it.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
if it had to be permanent, like completely, I think one of the things that would have helped make that a little bit better is if you had been able to have like an actual kind of proof of concept of the gameplay of the battle class. Because originally it would just give you like a little bit of a description and be like, oh, knights do this. Do you want this? It would have been better if you'd been able to just kind of like experiment with that for a while, have a little bit of gameplay that you're able to do yourself in like maybe a small confined space.
One of the designers suggested that. We couldn't figure out how to pull it off, but I think that this was a big, difficult decision. I remember that, and I'm pretty sure. I was the studio head at the time, so I'm pretty sure I was the one who made the final decision on that. So I'm sorry. I once was on vacation in Mexico for a week, and I was with this woman and her 8-year-old son at the time, and we were in this airport in the middle in Zihuatanejo, Mexico, and there was this family, and the young guy I was with was watching Skylanders on his laptop, and I was wearing a Skylanders T-shirt. And this kid looked over and he's like, "Oh, Skylanders! Oh, you guys are really into Skylanders. Why are you into this?" And the dad heard that I was involved in the making of it, and he just said, "You owe me so much money."
My father would probably tell you the same thing.
Well, I thank your father very much. I appreciate the
Yeah.
support he made to Activision in my own life. So thank you.
It was such a big part of my high school. It was just, going and shopping for Skylanders. It was so fun going out to the stores and seeing all the new stuff.
The realization that the buying of it was part of the entertainment was pretty fundamental to its success. And I would credit John Coyne with helping us realize that. And, he said, you want to come around the corner and be in Disneyland. He also taught us a lot about the first couple of years anyway of toy selection and the sort of various probabilities associated with finding things. And he really helped us have a much more mature collection paradigm. than we would have had. I mean, he advanced us a couple of years, and he was great at getting a budget from Activision so that the place you purchased toys was exciting and colorful and beautiful.
Oh
And
yeah,
one thing you can look at is our competitors copied it almost exactly, which is always a sign that you did things right.
but it did a really, really solid job of really selling the characters. And of course, you had the variants and the chase variants that everyone would have to
Mhm.
go run out to the store to try to find. Whenever it was revealed, like, oh, there's a new like variant with this paint color scheme. It's like, oh, all right, out to the store I go. Have to go check Toys R Us and Target and Best Buy and everything all over again. So fun.
The search
Um,
for new Skylanders was actually such a big part of the experience for us that shortly after Imaginators had come out, my now partner and I had just started our relationship together, and I brought her along on my search for creation crystals. And like, that was something that also allowed her to bond with our son. And it was the start of something. The search for Skylanders, all the way through playing with them as toys, through putting them into the games, it was just something that it was monumental for my family. And
I'm so
I
happy
just
to
can't
hear
even
that.
express how big a deal it was for us.
Those kinds of stories are the things that I will care about for the rest of my life. Money comes and goes, and it, it's this sounds corny, but if you realize that you've made a difference in a few families' lives, that's so much more important.
There's videos of people outside like the New York Toys R Us, right? Just lining up waiting for the new figures, people running by with cameras and everyone screaming, holding all the Skylanders merchandise. It's incredible. Like I can't even imagine how amazing it must feel to know that you were a part of designing something that people just love so passionately and has touched so many.
Oh, I've worked on a lot of games, and Fred and I have been working together for 30 years. And while we know that the science fiction game that we made 30 years ago has its diehard following, just in terms of the number of smiles and the number of gasps of excitement, which is sort of how you measure whether we've done things right or not, you can't beat Skylanders. I had people telling me that they were walking on trails, remote trails in distant countries, only to come around the corner and see a family with a kid hauling a Skylander down the trail. And to know that you've reached that far is pretty amazing. I think everybody who worked on it, both for the impact that the games directly had, and then we had some partnerships with the Make a Wish program, and working with kids directly. We had a number of kids come to the office and work with us, and learning about them and what their lives were like and how Skylanders had affected it. That was amazing. Definitely some of the high points of my career. So I feel really honored to have been able to work on it.
Yeah, and it's touching to hear stories about like the for Riley Soul Gem for Zap and
Mm,
everything.
yeah.
It's just amazing to know how much the people at Toys for Bob care about the fans.
It really is.
So
You get to create a culture and bring people in, and then you don't know if they're going to run with it. And every single person who worked on Skylanders was right with us on it. They cared about the people playing the game. They cared about the toys themselves, and the team who was working on it. We all had a lot of fun. It was hard work, but we had a lot of fun.
And I just have to say that your passion showed in the final
Hmm.
product.
I also think the background that you have as well in game design with making tabletop RPG stuff also very clearly shined through with Skylanders. You can
Absolutely.
really tell. You can really tell that you worked on Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, it was funny. Iwe with he was totally not into that, and so he was bringing his more Eastern anime influence, and then he's also really into sort of biological forms of animals. And I would be like, yes, and he's got a magic sword. It's like, I know he's a crab. That's cool, but he has a magic sword or a magic mace. And so it was
Yes.
this
Wham
blending of
show.
our sort of two different worlds, and he was up for it. I mean, we were a pretty good team.
So I guess if you were to make a new Skylanders game today, what features would you want to include? And is there anything that you'd want to change?
If I was to start over, I would probably try to simplify some of the element. This is pragmatic game design stuff and game studio stuff. I would try to diminish the cost of backwards compatibility so you could spend more of your resources on the new game. I would probably want to ideally manage the previous collection. We had this problem with called bucket of toys, where people who loved the series the most had just this colossal amount of toys, and it would overwhelm the game design. But I guess what I'd like for the toys to have more magical play between the toys and the real world. I'd love it if somehow you're carrying the toys around and you're having experiences with them, empowered them in the game. It wasn't just that the toy carried the game experience around in it, but somehow your travels or your learning or, just the things that you do over the course of your life would somehow be reflected in the game so that you felt like you mattered more and your unique experience mattered more.
I'm not gonna
That would
lie,
have been
that
cool.
is an incredible idea.
Which there were some rumors. I don't know if you heard anything about it, but there were some rumors floating around last year that got the whole Skylanders community buzzing. When there was like some rumors that a basically Pokemon Go Skylanders game was in development.
Ah,
Everyone was freaking out about that.
we proposed that a couple of times.
Oh,
we
really?
really wanted,
That
we really
explains where
wanted
they came from.
Well, you know what? I wish I could say it was an idea that was hard to come up with, but we all loved Pokemon Go, and for one of the reasons why I loved it so much. Well, Robert Leyland is a huge Ingress fan. Ingress is the first game by the company that went ahead and made Pokemon Go. But I had been interested in this idea of using location-based gaming. That's why I sort of applied for the patent for it and stuff like that. And so we had an idea at one point that every Skylander could be placed in the real world, an avatar could be created. So every toy you had, you could go to the real world and say, he is here. And then there would be an AR system, and you could look around and you could see where in the real world people had put their Skylanders. So if you had an enormous Skylanders collection, you could just stack them along the front of your house. And then when people went by, they would just see this huge array of cool monsters in front of your house.
That'd been so epic. Really.
Right?
So there's tons
Oh,
of good Skylander ideas left. That's If there's one thing I'll say is I'm confident that given the right focus and the right budget, people could put together some really interesting modern takes on Skylanders.
yeah. I wish that was greenlit.
Right?
That's such an epic idea. It really is. Well, I guess now we know where the rumors are coming from. I guess,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
plus there were also interviews you did that everyone was like really analyzing every word that
Oh my God. I'm
you
glad I
said.
didn't know that in advance.
Yeah, there were definitely some interviews where people were going back from like that you gave in like 2012, and people would be asking you like, well, what's next? And you'd be like, well, I want to add lasers, I want to add GPS functionality, I want them to talk. So everyone was
Yeah.
going back to it and being like, he mentioned GPS functionality. It must mean that these rumors are true.
I was thinking about it. I was thinking about
Yeah.
it. I also did get a laser working that you could power a low power laser from the cool Robert's cool broadcast power system, but there just was no safe amount of laser light.
Right. Kids and lasers don't mix.
Yeah.
Yeah, sad truth. Uh, but I did have a laser working at
It
one point.
it's really cool to know that you did.
Yeah. Like that would have been an interesting like core feature.
Yeah, exactly. The whole broadcast power thing is amazing. To me, that was so magical,
It
and I
is.
would
It
just
still
love to
is.
do more of that.
Like everything really that was done for especially the first couple games, like Giants added in Light Core, that's magical. Swap Force, you're able to customize your characters in the real world, put them in the game world that way, that's cool. Trap Team, you're able to pull your characters out. That that one's still the coolest to me. It's like you're like the transition of the audio from the TV to the portal is so awesome.
The entire franchise is nothing but pure magic. I grew up with Disney a lot. I was at Disneyland fairly regularly. So I'm familiar with the term Disney magic. And
Mhm.
yet I still feel like Skylanders kind of blows that away with the
Yeah.
magic of Skylands.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Like,
Thank
even
you.
as
Well,
an adult now, this is still, like, one of the coolest things I've ever seen. It
Yes.
really is.
Absolutely. So not only did it appeal to my son, my daughter is starting to approach the age where I'll be able to introduce her to Skylands, but it also appealed to me, who was a grown adult at the time the series launched. And
Yeah.
I think you guys did a really, really good job of making it something that would appeal to a larger, more diverse audience than maybe what the target demographic was.
Yeah, like, it's so satisfying, the gameplay loop, like, the replayability of the levels, all the collectibles, the fact that, the characters have upgrade trees, and you can level them up, to level 20 in the later games, like, there's so much stuff to do in these games that it's like, even after you've put hundreds of hours into them, there's still something else to do.
They have endless replayability for me because I actually developed a love for speedrunning because of these games.
really.
Yeah, I have watched other people do speedruns in various other games, and I was like, that kind of seems cool. Then I realized because I have leveled up literally every Skylander I own, maxed out their skill trees, all of that, I found myself trying to find ways to do all of this more quickly because there are so many figures. And then one day it just dawned on me it was you know what? Why not just see how quickly I can beat this game, start to finish? And
Uh,
that sparked a passion I didn't even know I had.
far out.
What was the best part about working on the Skylanders team?
Well, I think it was kind of rediscovering the joys of toys and play that I had as a kid. Most of the games I'd made were a little bit more cerebral on some level, and there was plenty of thinking and puzzling in Skylanders, but just being able the joy of having a physical toy and literally the magic of seeing it appear in the game, I never got tired of that. And then also the immense amount of learning that we had to do to make toys. We made hundreds of millions of toys. And when you have to learn, when you're challenged to do stuff you've never done before and then you succeed, that's the best.
Oh, I get that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So, what was an average day like working at the Toys for Bob office while working on Skylanders?
Wow. Well, everybody does a different job. So for me, it was always checking in with Eway, and we would have a producer with us to sort of say, "You're on track with this. You're behind on this." And, EA would say, okay, we have got a new undead character, and here's like the loose description of what they're like. And we would just sit there throwing ideas back, and then EA would say, well, let me draw for a while. And so he would go draw for a few hours. And meanwhile, I'd go over and talk with the level designers. Um, and on rare occasions, I got to do voice acting myself, which I really enjoyed. But that wasn't an everyday thing. That
Did you
I did the
voice some of the Skylanders?
I did the Willikins. I was the voice of the Willikins. So
I
I don't know
hear
if
it
that's
now.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool.
hello, how are you? Yeah, that was a lot of fun. But it as a studio head, what you're doing is you're moving from creative person and creative conversation to creative conversation. And the job isn't to make all the decisions, but to kind of help other people make good decisions and facilitate them doing the work. And
Makes
when I
sense.
was at my best, that was the case. Sometimes I would get attached to an idea and sort of push it through, and rarely was that the right solution, I think. And then there was talking with Activision, which had its charms and its pitfalls. But,
Okay.
I'd probably have 2 or 3 conversations a day with people down there and probably talk with, I would say, 10 or 15 different people most days.
Do you have any advice for those aspiring to enter the video game industry?
Wow, that is a big question. It really depends. If you have the option to be an engineer and you like doing that work, seriously consider that, because that job is always in need and it is the most highly compensated. And, particularly if you are remotely good at human communication, because not all engineers are, that would be the one bit of like simple truth. The other one is I would be very careful when you choose your job to choose a group of people who get along with each other, who you can tell that they're working as a well oiled machine, which is to say, you don't talk to one person and he's totally unclear on what this other aspect of the game are. So I want to work with people who aren't in factions, who are all united about making this a great product for the customer, for the player. But I guess I would say meeting people, learning, making human connections with people in the industry is the most important thing to do. And you do that by physical contact, so getting near people. And one way to do that is taking a job that necessarily isn't the destination you want to land at. You want to be a character designer. Well, maybe you're an animator for a while, if you have that capability, or maybe you're a test, or maybe you're, writing about the game. Because, now, we've had a conversation, my email address. You could call me, or you could say, hey, do you know any place I could go? And so the human connection that we've built is a really profound, if I needed something from your part of the world, I could just call you. And I think human connections can't be undervalued. Because when you're making hiring decisions, you're often hiring on the basis of someone's education or experience. But there's no doubt that knowing who they are and trusting them and having some sense of what kind of person they are really makes a difference. And also, if you're the kind of person who has the resources and you like school, there are training programs now. We did a lot of work with University of California Santa Cruz program. They have a game development, and there's a whole bunch of other universities that we would get people either in undergraduate or graduate programs to come work with us during the summer. If you're the kind of person who likes going to college and getting degrees and has the resources to do it, I would probably advise taking one of those programs, because they'll really throw you in the deep end, and you'll be making games pretty fast. And you'll finish a game project and you'll move on to the next game project. And so you'll sort of learn about the cycle of development as well.
Wow. Okay.
That's some really good advice.
Yeah. The question that the fans are most dying to hear answered. Are there any plans for Skylanders 7?
Even though you probably don't know the answer, or if you do know an answer, you can't tell us anyway, but we'll be berated in the comments otherwise. So.
I do not know the answer. Fred and I turned the leadership of the studio over to Paul Yen and Avery Lodato a couple of years ago. And then about a year ago, we actually left the studio altogether. So while we're friends with a lot of the people, we don't know what they're working on. I would say that Call of Duty seems their dominant effort right now. And that's pretty far removed from Skylanders. But I believe that there is an awful lot of love, love equity, I guess, is a way of mixing emotions in business. You have a lot of people who love the experience and who want to go back there and potentially take their kids back there to Skylands. And, the Netflix show is pretty successful. And so I think you've also got millions of people who've experienced the world through that. So I don't know what's being done now. I hope something is.
That's a really great answer.
I can only hope that one day we do see another game in the Skylanders universe.
That would be fun to do.
As the first 10 years draws to a close, if you could say one thing to the fans regarding how you feel about the franchise and the community surrounding it, what would it be?
I've never worked on a game that fostered as much love as the Skylanders franchise did, both in terms of how the creative team felt about the games they were making, the characters they were making, and the fans that they met. And then also coming the other direction from meeting people who loved the game and loved the characters and cared about the world that we had created. That period of time was just surrounded with wonderful feelings. And every day you're just filled with energy and support from other people. And it made working on it so much better. And, knowing, as I've heard from you guys, that playing the game made a difference in your lives and made a difference in your relationship with your kids, that's the best thing in the world.
Thank you so much for joining us for this 10th anniversary celebration. It's just been an absolute pleasure getting to talk with you and hear all these behind-the-scenes things about Skylanders that no one's been able to ask you before.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
This segment might be over, but don't touch that dial, baby. Stay tuned for another segment of the Skylanders 10th anniversary celebration. Until then, this is Chill Bill, signing off.
Actually, I did have one real quick fun question before we outro. Do you happen to have any Heartbreaker buckshots or yawn traps lying around?
I can send it
And
back,
which color are you looking for?
all of them.
Yep.
All of them, yawning. Okay. I'll
Fire,
check.
life, and light.
If you look on eBay, if they even happen to be on eBay, they go for like $2,000.
Really?
Yep.
I don't
Yeah.
think I have any of those.
Well,
I, I keep joking about selling my garage full of Skylanders. Really? The
we-
yawn trap.
Yep.
Yes, because it
Because-
was only, I don't know what happened during the release of Trap Team, but these were only released in Australia.
Really? Wow, yeah. Those are going for a lot. I'm just looking at eBay right now.
It's like, why only in Australia? There has to be like an Activision warehouse full of these things. that
Same
I
with the
just never
Heartbreaker
ship out.
buckshot, which was an Imaginator Sensei that
Was
it
canceled.
was canceled, but it wasn't officially canceled until like the point where it was supposed to be released because it was a
Yeah.
Valentine's Day.
I'm just looking at it now. Yes. Okay. I remember Iway doing the coloring for this.
Yeah, that character never released.
Huh. I wonder why. I wonder they must have had a deal going with somebody to support it, and that deal fell through because I'm looking at a package of it. Huh.
Yeah,